Hello everyone, Bladen Brightretter, incident meteorologist, and I'm here to give you a weather update for today, Saturday, September 15th. So we had a couple days of pretty nice, almost late, summer, early fall-like weather, light winds, decent humidity, reasonable temperatures. We weren't being cooked, but we weren't freezing. It was real nice. Well, today we got some change. Fire weather is making its return. Now, when I talk about fire weather, as a meteorologist, I'm looking at a couple different factors. I'm looking at humidity, or the amount of moisture in the air. I'm looking at the winds. Are those winds breezy? Are they strong? Are they transporting any of that moisture? I might also be looking at instability. I talked a little bit last time about how air just generally wants to fall down because it's tired, like all of us. So the unnatural state of air is for it to want to rise. And when you have fire, it's already standing up. You give it a little bit of momentum in that vertical direction, and you can start to see an influence to its fire behavior because of that. So we don't necessarily want unstable conditions. And then in addition to that, we will start to also consider thunderstorms. And if those thunderstorms are going to have a lot of rainfall with them or not. Because when we start getting into lightning and very little rainfall, then we can start to see more fire starts as a result. So there's a lot of different ways that we examine the atmosphere in order to decide whether or not we are dealing with elevated, near critical, or critical fire weather conditions. And this is not a one size fits all. So criteria for a red flag warning will differ from this part of the country over to, say, Florida. And that makes sense, right? I'm from the desert Southwest. My criteria at my home office is actually almost exactly the same as that of the Reno National Weather Service office here. So when we start to think about whether or not we have red flag conditions or if we have elevated fire weather, we're looking at relative humidity. I want to see it above 15%, and I want to see it above 15% by a good deal, partially because Grass and Finer Fuels, a fire behavior analyst, would be much more eloquent with this than I will. But your Finer Fuels here can actually carry fire with pretty decent humidity, up above, 20, 25, 30%. Now, as we get into timber and all of that, then it really matters that it's getting down into those teens and those single digits. And then, of course, winds. Are they gusting in this region 30 miles an hour or more? Are they sustained in that 20 to 25 mile an hour range? And that, for all intents and purposes, is breezy. We get into what we saw on Wednesday. Now we're getting into very windy and strong winds. Those are gusts from 50 to 70 miles an hour. So it's a wide berth, we'll say, of different criteria that we have to examine as we get into examining elevated, near critical, and critical fire weather. Today, we're elevated. So I'll show you why. This is called the Simple Water Vapor Imagery. It is satellite imagery that is basically looking at water vapor across all levels of the atmosphere, and it's using colors to kind of help us see exactly where that water vapor is. So if we go all the way up into Canada to that little guy that is spinning up and bothering them, that is our storm from Wednesday. And you can see that as it's traversed up, it's snagged onto a lot of Pacific moisture. There are a lot of rich colors going on in there, mostly blues and purples, which is signifying to me that there is a lot of water vapor at lower and middle levels of the atmosphere. So it's pretty saturated. That's something good for them. Now, as I get into what we're dealing with today, what is creating our elevated fire weather conditions, we have this guy. He's real weak. He's really hard to see, but you can see a little bit of green, maybe a spattering of some turquoise in there, scooting on into the corner as almost right around Lake Tahoe with its center, pushing on into the area. That signifies to me that green shows that there is water vapor at the highest levels, so that would be where we see our wispy cirrus clouds and not a lot down below. So In addition to that, our winds today start coming out of the southwest again, and in our case, that is going to be a very drying persuasion. So we're going to see our relative humidity, which was up in the 20 to 30% range even just yesterday, start to crater down and get a little bit closer to that 15% threshold. Now, I'm anticipating that we'll see the 20% definitely stick around to some of these higher elevations, but humidity kind of starts to fall as you get a little bit closer into some of the warmer sections. That's just its natural relationship. And so because of that, we're going to see anywhere between 15 and 20% into some of these highlands. And as we get into the lowlands, we may actually start to see them get a little bit closer down below 15%. In addition to that, we're going to see our winds kick up today because we have that disturbance coming in. Anytime you see basically this pattern here, it's hard to see on here, but you start to see things tighten up. You see wind fields start to tighten up. And anytime you get that tightening and you get to just be in the bottom of that trough area, you're going to see your winds increase. That's just the natural physics of it. So because of that, we'll have faster winds aloft, and that will come down to the surface. So we'll start to see some gusts getting up into the 20 to 25 mile an hour range. The highest winds will definitely hang out over Mount Rose and hang out with the old woman, over by her feet where the winds are born, right? That's the local lore I found out about y'all's place here yesterday. Really cool. And so those will be where we see that 25 mile an hour sort of situation. But as we get down here, we're starting to see getting closer to 18 to 20 miles an hour. And that's just enough to create that elevated critical fire or elevated fire weather that we don't really want to see as we're dealing with stuff like this. But to quote what our fire behavior analyst said, in some ways it's a good thing because it does show you where some of those strengths, your vulnerabilities, your weaknesses are as you start to get into a situation like where they're at on this fire now. Now, looking at what we have ahead. Here we are on Saturday. This is our weather outlook. The best way to look at this is when we start to see some of our warmer colors. That's when we start to kind of up our caution levels. If we start to see red, if we get 4 more red blocks in a day, then we're starting to get into a critical day. So for today, you see a lot of yellow, little bit of red there. So we got temperatures getting into the lower 80s today. That's about a 5 to 7 degree increase from what we saw yesterday. That minimum humidity, like I said, getting in and around 15%. Then Haines Index, it's basically a way of looking at dryness and instability. It's a scale of going up to 6. So right now we're at 5. There will probably be a lot of areas that are also seeing 4, but for the most part, we do have a bit of instability. And so we put that on here so that the crews and the teams know to expect that we could see air starting to rise up. So if any fire did get going, it would have a little bit easier time standing up and getting out of bed, as it were. And then, of course, we have our little more uppity winds, our sporty winds, and they will be coming in west-southwest for the most part throughout the day today, mostly into the late afternoon, getting into the early evening. Now, let's zoom back out, go to the satellite again real quick, and I'll show you kind of what's to come. You can barely see it. It's right up here in the corner. It's starting to make its way down towards the Pacific Northwest, right there, right on the edge. So this is our big cold front that we're going to be dealing with moving into Sunday night. So looking at Sunday, we're going to see things start to cool off. We're going to see the fact that our winds are going to really amp up in response to the tightening of that as it comes down, and we sit right in that pattern of where those winds are. And then on top of that, it is very, very moisture rich. And so it will bring a whole lot of moisture in with it. We'll shoot back over to the matrix, and you can see that from the perspective of some numbers here. So a little bit cooler. Look at that humidity. So throughout the day tomorrow, we're going to see that humidity. It's going to fall a little bit, and then it's not going to be able to fall anymore because there's so much moisture coming in with this system. Our instability is still up there, but it gets drugged down. We're not 5, and we're not 5 because that moisture has come into play. And then we start to see winds 30 gusts 40. Now, that could be a problem, right? That could be a problem if we weren't getting the moisture from that. That's not necessarily too dissimilar from what we saw on Wednesday. We can call it Wednesday light, if even, So we'll still see some very strong winds up on the ridge line, anywhere from 50 to 60 miles an hour. There might be other points along that disturbance where they see 70 again. I don't anticipate that those are going to be knocking on our door, but we're still going to have some very strong winds up here. And then as we get down into the highlands and the lowlands here, that's when we'll see them kind of chill out a little bit. But either way, we're looking at around a 30 gust 40 for an average coming out of the southwest tomorrow. And so that would be a huge problem if this was different. So it's kind of like balancing scales. If I start to get too little humidity with that kind of wind, then I have critical fire weather. But as long as I'm starting to see, that increase in moisture next to those kinds of winds, it's not as dire of a situation. But what that means too is that we still might see some, elevated fire weather conditions, because again, remember what I said, we do have finer fuels to deal with, and finer fuels are able to carry a little bit, even in richer moisture regimes like that. So 2 days of elevated fire weather conditions before we start to get in to the real business of that cold front on Monday, where we'll see temperatures drop about 20 to 25 degrees compared to Sunday's highs. We'll really see an increase in moisture from around 29% for a minimum to 45%. We have almost no instability because anytime you get a cold front through here, it stabilizes all the air. Air is just really tired. It goes to bed. No more stability. No more instability. And then our winds are obviously going to come down pretty significantly behind that as well. The big thing is this. We're going to start to see showers come into play. And if you're living at around 7,500 feet or so, and the conditions are just right, and you're at the exact place where you need to be in relation to the system, you might see some snow. So much more fall-like weather is on the docket as we go into next week, and I'll get into a little bit more of that tomorrow. But as for today, continue to practice really, really smart fire safety out there. Be really, really aware of your surroundings, and just remember that fall is on its way. Thank you guys so much.